Good afternoon, everyone. Give us just one moment here while we get things set up, and then we'll get started with the Technical Assistance Grants Program webinar. There it is.
All right. Welcome. Yes, sorry for just getting everything set up there for the last couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do introductions really quick here. I'm Dan Schmoll. I'm the tip manager here at MORPC, and I will be helping lead this presentation. I will be kind of a contact person for everyone here, and anyone who's going to be kind of applying for our Technical Assistance Grants Program. So I will certainly be, I'm sure, seeing and talking to a lot of you throughout this process.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm Jordan Petroff. I'm an active transportation and safety planner here at MORPC. I've been involved with the previously Technical Assistance Program, now Technical Assistance Grants Program since 2021. So kind of seen it change and grow, and yeah, excited to see this first round. We're kind of expanding the services. We'll add a little bit more about that today, but yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and then I'm Tom Graham. I'm the Associate Director of Transportation Planning here at MORPC. And just like Jordan just said, we're very excited to be expanding the scope of services offered by the Technical Assistance Program, now calling it the Technical Assistance Grants Program. And we'll go ahead and just get into the presentation here today. So to start off, to give you a bit of an agenda for what to expect in this presentation, we'll obviously introduce the program. We'll then talk about some program eligibility and requirements, and then we'll move into the service offerings of the program and get into some of those eligible activity types. We'll also cover the application process and the information that is needed within that application. And then on the back end, we'll talk about what the process looks like for those projects which are awarded technical assistance grants funding, and what those next steps would be. And then, yeah, as Jordan just mentioned, we will also have some time for questions and answers here at the end. So to start off with an introduction of the program, the TA Grants Program, now abbreviated to the TAG program, provides both MORPC staff assistance and consultant-led services to eligible members within the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or the MPO. In prior years, this was only staff assistance coming from MORPC, and the expansion this year allows us to also fund some consultant-led activities. And this generally looks like community-based planning services that are advancing the goals listed in the MTP. That's the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's our long-range vision out through 2050 for the full transportation network within the MPO. And we're going to be funding some plan and project development activities to assist projects getting grant or implementation ready. The TA Grants Program will be awarded through a competitive evaluation process. And that evaluation won't just be done in-house here by MORPC, but there is an evaluation committee that we engage for these applications. We have some more detail on that in a later slide. And we're generally looking at services that would last, up to about a year. So to talk about the MTP strategies that are specifically targeted within the Technical Assistance Grants Program. I'm not going to read all of these off, but I do want to highlight that these are set aside within the TA Grants Program guidelines for the state fiscal year 26 and state fiscal year 27 programs. So you'll be able to find this list within those guidelines, as well as here on screen right now. But to speak generally to what these look like, these are the MTP strategies that are primarily focused on promoting active transportation, multimodal transportation options, and more generally promoting transportation safety for all users. So you'll be able, when you're applying, to identify which MTP strategies you are advancing. But the ones that are set aside for evaluation here are generally focused in those areas.
So,
Yeah.
so I'll talk a little bit now about the TAG program eligibility. So as we're seeing here, local government or other eligible member within our NPO, we have to be within the scope of the TAG program, which is outlined in the policies that everybody should have available to them at this point. And we must have a complete application, make sure we have a detailed scope of work with a schedule included. As Tom mentioned, we are trying to stick to roughly 12 months for these services. So we want to make sure that we are at least have some sort of preliminary schedule that that shows that. A signed letter of commitment. And we also want to make sure that we have our applications settled by our quarterly application deadline. So for projects, we will have a rolling kind of open application window, but we will be reviewing applications on a quarterly basis just to kind of make sure that we can approve projects regularly and not just sort of, as they come in. So we will have kind of these rolling deadlines, and the first one that's going to be coming up here on April 24th. So then talking a little bit, once we, have our eligibility all settled, a little bit more about the applicant and awardee responsibilities. So as we're kind of talking about these 6 points up here, we want to make sure that there's the proper designation of staff and time commitment and a project manager that's going to be with the project throughout the process so that we, understand we have a point of contact and that there's someone who's going to be, have their kind of hands in what's going on throughout the whole project. Making sure that we have the relevant data and materials. So, we'll be tagging our local agencies and members to make sure that, they're providing us with any kind of information that would be necessary, to provide either to our staff or to consultants. Participation from the relevant departments. So we know that it is, a lot of these projects can span multiple departments, have multiple kind of people within an agency that are going to be involved. So we want to make sure that we have that regular communication. So making sure that we have that stakeholder engagement. Making sure that we are working, agencies are working with us to establish that stakeholder group and keep them in the loop on what's going on. Regularly scheduled check-ins with MORPC staff. So we want to make sure that we're aware of what's going on. We want to make sure that we're seeing project progress and that everything is moving along as intended. And making sure that there's consistent and timely review. So that'll be, on the MORPC side and also on the agency side to make sure that we are keeping our reviews and keeping our submittal of materials, again, kind of on schedule and moving along as needed. So then kind of a little bit more of a broad view of the purpose here. Tom mentioned the MTP, which is kind of at the center here. As you can kind of see in this little, spoke setup that we have. The ATP, our Complete Streets policy, our Central Ohio Greenways vision, and Insight 2050 are all kind of the contributing factors that are all, are all sort of players in the MTP as well. And so we want to make sure our services are aligning with all of these, including the MTP, as Tom mentioned, and that all of these plans kind of have a vision and sort of contribute to a transportation system that provides the mobility needs that we know exist. So I'll hop in now to the service offering. So on this first slide here, you'll kind of see on the left, these are all things that in some way or another have been part of the previous technical assistance program. And I'll always ask Tom and Jordan to let me know if there's any other additional kind of information to add, as this is my first cycle with the TA program here, and I'm still catching up a little bit. So, but all these things on the left, things that in some way, shape, or form would have been covered in previous iterations of this program, and then kind of something that we're adding a little bit of a new portion to this is on the right, consultant services for feasibility studies and multimodal plans. So that's kind of what we've been talking about, and hopefully most of you at this point have heard, is that an expansion of this program for offering technical assistance is now going to be available for some of these more robust and detailed studies and plans that can hopefully get projects, as Tom mentioned, grant, or maybe even shovel ready in some scenarios, or at least implementation ready. And so that'll be where we kind of expand this program and bring some of the consultants on board, so that we can make sure that we have the expertise necessary to execute those plans and study activities. So kind of jumping in here to now consultant-based services. There's two main categories that we're looking at for this kind of expanded consultant-based services. That's going to be project development and plan development. So just to kind of give a little bit of notes on a little bit more detail, I guess, on that. Plan development is going to be for more of those multimodal plans, active transportation plans, safety plans, corridor studies, things of that nature. So those are true planning activities. Project development is what we're kind of looking at when we talk about our feasibility studies, maybe, conceptual engineering plans, maybe cost estimates, things of that nature that are a little bit more on the engineering side. And again, providing a little bit more detail to get projects to that grant ready stage. It will be the same eligibility criteria as we discussed earlier, which is the NPO area. Again, with a focus on project and funding readiness. So again, getting more detail involved. And these will be pre-qualified consultant-led services. So looking at that feasibility and multimodal transportation plans, we're looking at having ODOT pre-qualifications. We went through our pre-qualification process earlier this year. And that pre-qualification process, incorporated a little bit of our own requirement, but was mostly focused on making sure that we have those ODOT pre-quals that are necessary to perform these services. So it will be a competitive evaluation again on a quarterly basis. And I think an important thing to note is we will be kind of placing an emphasis on demonstration of need for these projects. So that's kind of an important thing to note as everyone is thinking about what projects they want considered for these consultant-based services. And again, our budget, we've been able to kind of progress a lot of funding and kind of have this budget that we're showing on screen of over $800,000 this year. So we're very happy and very proud of that, and we're hoping that we can provide a lot of benefit with that budget.
Yeah, just one thing I will note on the budget. That is our budget for the entirety of the technical assistance program through the end of state fiscal year 27. So that's the amount of funding we have for about the next 15 months. I don't think we'll want to send all of that out the door just with this first rolling deadline. So we'll probably spread that out throughout different application timeframes. The exact amounts will depend on which applications we receive, what the need looks like in discussions with the evaluation committee. So just to add a little bit of context.
Yeah, no, yes. Thank you for putting the brakes on that. Because yes, Tom's right. Yeah, that will be distributed among this whole program. So then as far as the remainder of the eligible activities here for project development, as you see up on screen, I kind of mentioned some of these already. So really anything that's related to providing, again, kind of a greater level of detail, moving from pure planning activities, into, closer to the engineering phase, and anything that's kind of needed to get to that level. I think an important thing to note as we go through both this and the next slide talking about plan development activities, reach out to us and ask if you're not sure. If a project falls into one of these categories. We want this funding to be used for projects that need it. And so if you have a project that needs it and you're not sure exactly where it fits, reach out to us. Let's talk about it. And we can see if it fits under maybe something that's not listed on the screen, but if it's kind of can fall under the umbrella of project development or plan development, then I think we'll definitely encourage an application. So let us know and we can talk about that as needed. So then plan development activities, again, mentioned some of these already. But any of these kind of multimodal plans that many agencies and regions are kind of putting together. Any kind of active transportation, safety type planning activities are going to be things that can fall under our plan development activities umbrella. So then, yeah, I'll have when you guys maybe want to just give a quick update or a quick talk about the staff-based services as we kind of roll through here a little bit.
Yeah, so I can jump in here. I'll kind of go through high level some of those categories of the service offerings that we provide with our staff-based services. A lot of these are things we've done in the past or potentially doing currently. So within active transportation planning, Dan mentioned that those multimodal plans, developing those kind of full-scale plans are really going to be where we look toward the consultant services wing of this program. But where there are sort of like components of maybe an active transportation plan or multimodal plan that are particularly needed. So not a full plan development, but maybe just like the network prioritization, just the analysis. That is something that our MPO area communities, they can come to us and apply for that. So for instance, that's something that we did with Violet Township. We did some stakeholder engagement and kind of geospatial analysis, network prioritization, and screening to kind of clarify what their lower and midterm and then high level priorities were for kind of the network as they're kind of getting going on increasing investment in active transportation network development. Early on in the TA program, I also focused on developing some complete streets policies for communities, kind of utilizing existing templates in our regional policy. That's not something we've done in a while. I think we've seen a lot of complete streets policies been developed. So I think a lot of communities have those now, but it is something we continue to offer, even if it's, updating them or assessing them. And then we had this transit supportive infrastructure planning. We kind of under that term, we've worked with the city of Grove City over this past year. It's been more of a corridor study, but now that the Linkus transit supportive infrastructure program is a reality, for communities kind of interested in honing in, kind of looking at the details of what are some good candidate projects, what are some potential applications or funding proposals they can put forth to the committees, and they kind of want to work with us to assess what that might be at a high scale. That's something we would do through that. Similar vein, we have done a good bit of trail, Central Ohio greenways, visioning related planning work. So again, not full scale trail plans, but kind of components. So we've looked at, it might look like, zooming in on a kind of component of the vision. So we know the cog vision is conceptual. A lot of the lines in there are, fat Sharpie lines on a map sort of deal. So kind of looking in, zooming in, what are the different alignments that could happen? We did this with Metro Parks. We looked at a number of different alignments at a granular scale to identify, which one's the most feasible, preferable. We did similar work with Brown Township. And kind of similar to the active transportation network planning, looking at existing trail facilities or potentially even proposed trail facilities and assessing how to increase access to that trail. That's, I think, a very common conversation that we have is how do we kind of create those access points and access connectors to our trail facilities and our anchors. And I think another thing I'll mention in here is obviously as the MPO and the regional convener, if there's a community that's looking to do sort of an extra jurisdictional or multi-jurisdictional planning effort, they can definitely come to us for any of these services. That's something the city of Dublin did back in, I want to say 2022. So they wanted to look at sort of the whole northwest quadrant of Franklin County, partner with Hilliard and the county and Worthington and others to look at what do the connections between their jurisdictions look like and kind of clarify that. So I think that's a particularly good use of the staff services within the TA Grants program. With bike and pedestrian safety, so for one, if there's kind of this particular area or a roadway that folks are looking to do sort of a complete street safety audit. So, maybe a walking audit or a biking audit. That's something that we could organize, sort of do the initial crash data analysis to identify what are the primary locations to look at if we're kind of starting from a jurisdictional level and kind of use that data to hone in on where we kind of want to do a site insight analysis or audits. That's something we can do. That's something we've done with the Village of Galena. As part of a safety audit in their village, in their town center. specifically if we're kind of doing, again, a component of a full-on comprehensive safety action plan, that, maybe just the analysis, maybe just running kind of a high injury network, a pedestrian safety analysis, that's something we offer. Then in the past, we have developed a safety action plan for the city of Delaware. So that is something that we could explore if a community is looking to develop a larger scale safety action plan. And that's where we might sort of start to talk about involving consultants or a consultant team. That could be a joint effort between MORPC staff and consultants to kind of rise to that level, but that is something that we offer. Finally, land use planning. This is kind of similar to the complete streets, not something we've done in a while, but in the past, we have worked with the city of Hilliard and Jefferson Township to produce sort of these concept plans. We're not, again, this the kind of where that barrier is between our staff services and consultant services. We're not kind of rising to the level of providing specific zoning recommendations or, like form-based code language or anything like that. It's a lot of guidance and conceptual level recommendations. And that could be, there's a lot of transit-oriented development conversation. So if somebody's kind of looking to hone in on that, that could be somewhere we bring in our partners at CODA to kind of have a conversation, kind of build on the work that's happening on West Broad and things. So again, not something that we've worked on in a while. Obviously, our focus at MORPC, or particularly in our mode department, has been on transportation, but we know that it's intrinsically linked with land use planning. So it's something that we continue to offer and something we can explore with our local communities. And I think that kind of segues here to this last kind of other activity. If you feel there's nothing that really neatly fits into any of those service types, again, like Dan mentioned, just reach out to us. We kind of flesh out another activity type. So we actually have been working with the city of Gahanna on kind of other activity where we're working with them to develop an online dashboard for their capital improvement program. So to take projects that kind of maybe lived in spreadsheets before or lived in people's heads, maybe, to kind of get those down into a data layer and then visualize that data in an internal dashboard where folks can see different projects, identify strategic project coordination opportunities and things like that. So other sort of other activity types that folks have in mind that would kind of be a good fit for staff services we want to hear about. So. And if you're interested, on our TA Grants website, we have a link to this dashboard. So this summarizes all of our past completed services, I think up to 2024. So you can see, those green dots showing where we've kind of worked with communities. We have a summary of the work that was done and then some links to like the full deliverables there as well. So that's where you can kind of learn more about what we've done and what might be possible.
All right. So with all of that, we've talked about what the offerings can be, but now we'll go into a little bit of detail about how you apply for any of those services. So for the 2026 application, this is live now. It is an online application. It's through FormStack. We do have the link to the application there on screen, but it's also available on the Technical Assistance Grants Program webpage. There's relevant details about the application within the program guide, but it's also a fairly easy online application to navigate. So it consists of only 5 total pages. You have the capacity to save it and have it send you a link so that you can return later. We will note, if you are saving attached files to the application, wait until you are ready to submit the application to upload those files, because when you save and return, it doesn't retain the files you've uploaded. So you'd have to attach them again. One annoying quirk of FormStack, but hopefully something that isn't too hard for everyone to work around. To get into what's actually required as documentation here, our first page is just going to be that applicant information. So basic contact information, identify who that project manager is going to be. Then we get into looking at the service type that you're requesting. So this looks a little different than past year's applications because we have more service types now. So you're going to identify if you're applying for consultant-led, MORPC staff-led services, or if you're applying for a combination of both. And you can see there are fields there to identify which of those technical assistance activity types that we were just talking about in the service offerings that your project is specifically applying for. And I'll just reiterate what Dan had said earlier. If you don't know if your project fits cleanly into one of these categories, please reach out to us. We're happy to have those conversations. And as Jordan mentioned, if maybe it doesn't fit into any of the categories, that doesn't mean that it's not that it's immediately not eligible. We have that other category for a reason. As we get into some required documentation, we would ask that just a basic scope of work be prepared for staff to be able to understand you're applying for this project. We see the activity type, but provide us with some additional detail. Try to really highlight what is needed and what services you're hoping can be achieved via the technical assistance grants program. And then also, depending on the service, there's going to be varying levels of staff commitment on the part of the applicant. When we're doing these MORPC staff-led services, there is a lot of coordination between our staff and your staff at these local agencies. So we just want to see some indication of what level of staff commitment is going to be made. And then we get into the application these evaluation questions and where they're focused. So I think we have these in more detail on the following slides, but maybe I'm wrong. Yeah, we do in a second, but nonetheless, very quickly, it is just these different criteria on screen. So we're going to talk about the community objectives. We're then going to talk about how applications are tied back to those MTP strategies, specifically the ones that are listed in the program guide. Talk about how this project is going to implement these regional priorities. And moreover, we need to look at the community impact considerations, again, the local commitment and sort of the collaboration that's coming out of this, as well as how the project could be leveraging other investment. All of those were evaluation criteria in previous rounds. The one that we are adding this round is the local need for assistance. And that really comes down to the fact that with the expansion of the TA grants program and this ability to do consultant-led services, there was also a strong focus in trying to make sure that the smallest communities, the ones who can't fund that type of work, and the ones where we're seeing issues with the ability of even getting a project to the point where they can go apply for a grant because they don't have enough good information on the project. That's a key focus of this program, is trying to mitigate those impacts. So finally, again, that scope of work and that commitment upload there, you can see kind of just a general sample letter of commitment or a general scope of work sort of template available there as well. And I knew we had more detail on the evaluation criteria. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about community objectives. This is going to be worth 25 points. It's out of a total of 100 possible points per application. So this is where you're going to describe the significance of the proposed activity. How are you seeing this as being beneficial at a community level? And specifically, how will the additional technical assistance improve the activity that will be taking place? When we look at MTP strategies, there's another 15 points. Again, identify those specific MTP strategies that are focused on improving safety and developing active transportation and transit infrastructure. Identify the ones that your project will be advancing. We do look for responses here to address at least 2 and up to 5 of the most applicable strategies. So there's a long list within the program guidelines. So please, yeah, as it says here, refer to page 3 of the program guidelines to see which specific strategies are being considered within this program. We then look at how the project that is applying is implementing regional priorities. So this is just a description that's tying back to some of these regional planning activities, whether that be the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the Active Transportation Plan, the Central Ohio Transportation Safety Plan, or the COG vision. At this point, I'm sure there are other regional plans that you could also refer to here, but those are some good examples of where you can tie back to some regional priorities. When we talk about community impact considerations, also at 15 points, this is really where we're looking at sort of that equity component. How will the project address the needs of historically disadvantaged or underserved populations? So you can see all the different populations that we're interested in you referring to here. We then have the local commitment and collaboration at 10 points. So that's just getting at, one, is the local agency committed to the coordination that is necessary to advance a technical assistance project? Additionally, above and beyond just that minimum requirement, how will this project continue to be a local priority? How will you go about engaging relevant community stakeholders? And just what other activities can the local do to enhance the quality of the technical assistance process? And you can use this area to identify some of those stakeholders as well. When we talk about leveraging investment for another 10 points, that's really how will the technical assistance services themselves be leveraged to implement active transportation and transit infrastructure? Or just generally, how will we see increased benefit as a result of the technical assistance? And then finally, that new criteria, the local need for assistance. We just want you to indicate how the MORPC technical assistance would address a local need which can otherwise not be met with currently available local resources. So that's what local staff / budgetary constraints exist, which necessitate the award of technical assistance for the activity to advance. Obviously, not a requirement if your project would be able to advance with the local services that you have. Still feel free to apply for this program, but this does give a little bit of an edge to applications which have a greater need for the funding to be able to advance these activities.
All right, and I will give Tom a break here and talk a little bit more about the application evaluation process here. So when we receive applications, we will have a committee that was mentioned early on. It'll be MORPC planning staff and external reviewers who are selected by MORPC, and they'll have relevant experience that will apply to the various different types of applications we receive. And those external reviewers will come from regional partners who are not themselves eligible to apply. So make sure there's no conflict of interest. And the projects will be kind of scored and evaluated collectively by that committee. So as far as selection, once that scoring is completed, just be selected on highest scores, very simple and straightforward. And the committee will kind of refer projects to the preferred program, whether it's staff consultant based, or if none was specified or both are specified, we'll kind of determine based on the budget and staff capacity, things of that nature, where that project should fall. The number of awarded projects kind of will depend on a lot of things Tom mentioned earlier. The budget will be obviously a big one, and we're going to, as we mentioned, want to try to make sure that we're giving as many projects as possible a chance. So we will likely be kind of spreading that budget out a little bit over the fiscal year here. As far as staff-based assistance, obviously the MORPC staff capacity will come into play. And then obviously project quality and the evaluation, criteria and how everything shakes out with that. Non-selected projects, I think this is an important thing to note, will remain eligible to submit an updated application for the next rolling deadline. So I think, really that's a good opportunity to keep a project in consideration. I think all we would ask is that you update any information that is relevant or necessary to be updated as we move from one deadline to another. So if anything has, happened or developed that may, kind of hopefully increase chances of success for being awarded the grant, then I think that would be all we would ask. So then we're gonna kind of, we've talked now about the actual projects and selection for the applications of those projects, but now we're gonna talk a little bit more about how we go through and assign staff-based services and the consultant procurement as well. So when we talk about the staff-based services portion of the TAG program, any successful applicants will then kind of move into this project scoping phase. So working with MORPC staff to make sure we refine the scope and make sure that, the requirements of how much staff time that Tom mentioned earlier, it kind of lines up with the scope that's being finalized. And then, making any adjustments necessary to the scope that was submitted to the application, we'll have to make sure we're doing that. And, we'll also identify at that point which MORPC staff will be involved in the project. And, we'll make sure that we have the relevant expertise for the staff that we have here to, make sure that's an efficient use of time. And then, as far as coordination goes, we mentioned earlier, making sure that we're staying on schedule with regular meetings, making sure that we are, keeping up to date with deliverables and things like that. So I think, in anticipation of kind of regular coordination with MORPC and some regular meetings as well, is what should be expected there. So as far as consultant-based services, the process here, we're going to just highlight really quickly again, those eligible consultant services, again, with the plan development and project development activities. There is a little bit, this timeline actually is going to be, most applicable here, but this is kind of going to give a good overview of what we're looking at as far as a general timeline for getting the services underway. The reason it's most applicable here, consultant led services, is because we have a couple extra steps here in consultant procurement. So for our current round, you can kind of see this layout of schedule, and as noted on the bottom, this will kind of be a similar timeline for the next deadline. So if you can kind of follow out with, how many weeks, months, we're looking at to get from our first deadline to our first kind of services getting underway. It'll be a similar kind of cycle for each quarter. So after we have our second quarter deadline kind of end here at the end of April, we're looking at May 22nd, so about a month or so until we do our selection of projects, go through that evaluation process, select projects, and then after that, for consultant-led services, have the RFPs posted on MORPC's website. And it'll also be posted on ODOT's local LENT project website. So probably an important time to know, or point to note now, that we will be following ODOT's local LENT project procedures for consultant procurement. So we've been working with ODOT. I think it will be very, very close. It'll be paralleling the process. So any consultants here that are, or actually any agencies as well that have kind of gone through that ODOT process will be familiar. There will certainly be some minor differences, just as, an agency, especially when it comes to, contracts and things, we are a little bit different than ODOT, but because we're using federal funds, we're going to try to make sure we follow that process and stay in compliance with any of those requirements that are necessary for utilizing federal funds.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing here for clarity. With consultant-led services, it is the anticipation that MORPC will work with the locals to develop that RFP, but we will be the ones who actually procure a consultant. These funds are already encumbered under one of our planning programs. So in an effort to not have to seek out federal authorization for these activities again, it will be easiest and most efficient for MORPC to hold the contracts, though obviously we will want a significant commitment from the local to continue to assist with the coordination and assist both coordination with MORPC and with whatever consultant is brought on for the activity. So I'll
Yeah.
let you get.
Yeah, no, that's a very good, very good point to make. But yes, and so as we're kind of continuing through the process here, from that May 22nd when RFPs are posted, it'll be at least a 3-week process or at least a 3-week posting. So that will take us to that June 12th date. That'll be when completed proposals are due. So then we'll take a couple of weeks there to kind of start evaluating proposals. May reach out for interviews as needed to any consultants that do submit letters of intent. Again, might be a good, I think I might have this on the next slide, but good time to note that it'll be a programmatic selection process. It'll be a letter of intent. I do have a little more information on that later. So, but just to kind of note here that that's what that proposal will look like. And then after that kind of 2-week window, we'll take another week to kind of consider everything, make our final recommendations right before the July 4th holiday weekend. And then after we make those recommendations, the first business day back, we'll make our contacts out to all the bidders and let everyone know what awards are being recognized. And then throughout July will kind of be our contract preparation and authorization. Obviously, we will try to expedite that as much as possible to get services underway as soon as we can. So a little bit more about the actual procurement process. So I mentioned we'll be following ODOT's local lead manual to comply with all federal funding requirements. The postings will be on MORPC's website and on the ODOT's local project postings. 3-week window for those RFPs to be available. And again, consultants have to be ODOT pre-qualified to apply. The solicitation and selection of consultants will follow, like I mentioned, the programmatic selection. So that'll be a standard letter of interest, not intent. Letter of interest, which is the 10+2 page requirement. So that 2-page technical approach, and then in addition to the 10 pages of kind of the rest of the application material. So all of that is available on ODOT's website. That can be, if anyone does not have that information readily available, we can make sure that we send you to the right place to look at all those requirements. Again, Tom mentioned contracts will be held by MORPC. We're looking for that 1 year, 12-month kind of window for schedule. And I don't think this has been mentioned yet, so this is a good time to bring up that we are looking at generally keeping the contracts to a maximum of $100,000. I should maybe say the project maximum for $100,000 per project. So I think, we've discussed and exceptions I think will be possible in special circumstances if we're looking at, a special regional project of regional significance, something of that nature. But that would be on a very case-by-case basis. I think we are all trying to aim for that $100,000 cap to make sure that we're getting as many projects, eligible or as many projects awarded these funds as possible. So then just a little bit more on this consultant-led side of things, consultant-based side of things. The proposal will be evaluated using kind of this quality-based selection criteria. Again, this is ODOT's local let procedures. So hopefully is fairly familiar to a lot of folks. So we'll make sure we have at least 3 consultants shortlisted in the event that hopefully, we have that many consultants apply. If not, obviously it will be less. But then we'll be using the standard consultant selection rating form to kind of go through and do an evaluation. Again, as a kind of internal and group and including the local agency as well to do that evaluation using that standard form. And then also just as a note, many again are probably less familiar that, any contracts that are under 50,000, there will be allowed direct select for that as well. And that is following, in parallel with what ODOT does as well for the small purchase requirements that they have in place. So again, mentioned that there may be some clarification interviews to answer questions, and we would reach out to consultants as needed for that. So then finally, for selection, the shortlisted consultants, the rankings will be provided. We'll make sure the select consultant will negotiate a contract then at that point and make sure that it's fitting within the criteria that we would like for that. And we'll have to work with the consultant, make sure that producing project updates and deliverables in a timely manner, keeping up with the contract and the scope terms that were agreed to. So that's kind of a little bit of overview of the process there. And then we're about to close out here, so any questions that you have, make sure you have them locked and loaded or in the chat. But I'm just going over the schedule ahead. So this is kind of a general overview here, stuff that has actually already happened, which is great. We had our all our committee approval of this program, opened up the solicitation window there. It was last week. So that's open now. As I mentioned, kind of previously going through that more detailed timeline, we'll be evaluating consultant proposals and gathering info, things like that nature here throughout May and June, and then be awarding contracts and beginning services in July. And then just to kind of finish up here on the quarterly deadline. So this is more of an overview of the project as a whole, as Tom mentioned, working through the rest of the state fiscal year 27. We'll have July, the last Friday or the fourth Friday. What was it? The fourth Friday, I think, of each of each quarter there at the end of each quarter. So it'll be July 24th, October 23rd, and then January 22nd of 2027 will be those kind of rolling quarterly deadlines that we'll be evaluating projects on. So that takes us to the end here of the presentation. That's all of our contact info. So we will open it up for questions at this time.
Yeah, so I'll read off the first question we have in the chat here. City of Whitehall, council member asked questions about the source of the grant fundings and asking us to clarify how MORPC is funding this grant, especially with changes to the consultant program.
Yeah, this is being funded via a allocation of MORPC's Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds, or STBG funding. On a year-by-year basis, we allocate funds from our sub-allocation from FHWA for eligible planning activities within the MPO region. And this is how we've been funding the technical assistance program for some time. But we have recently induced some more funding into this program, and that's what's allowing us to expand the services. So at the end of the day, the federal funding source is STBG.
Okay. And then Dan asked, if applicants are not selected, will they receive feedback on how their project is scored? Yes. So part of the evaluation committee process. So obviously they go through their scoring. They also provide comments describing why they provided a certain score, sort of reasoning. So we would share that kind of aggregated reasoning for applicants that don't receive an award. And then we also meet with the evaluation committee after they've gone through the scoring. That group meets to kind of talk about their scores, adjust them as needed based on their collective conversation. And, from those conversations, we'd also have information to share about why certain applications may not have been awarded. And then Kendall mentioned that the link to the sample letter of commitment does not work. Yeah, we'll go ahead and fix that. We did a kind of a website wide update a few months ago, and pretty much every link on our website got broken. So we're kind of gradually repairing all of those. So thank you for bringing our attention to that. Make sure that's repaired. Any other questions? I think everybody should also have their mics, should be able to unmute if it's easier to mention it, but you can also feel free to drop it in the chat if there's any other questions.
And as we've mentioned throughout, please feel free to reach out to us after it's needed. I saw an unmute there, so I apologize if I cut anyone off.
Yeah, this is Dan again. I just had another question. Are any of the listed MTP goals that you have in the application information weighted more heavily than others, or are they pretty much all equally weighted?
No, with regard to the MTP goals, they are all more or less equally weighted. There is no breakdown by MTP strategy as they're listed.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Well, I will point out, if anybody is interested in sharing this webinar out, we are recording it. We do intend to post it so it can be available. But just like Dan said, in addition to this webinar being a resource and the program guide itself. If there are questions as you prepare applications, do not hesitate to reach out to any of us here at MORPC. We'd be happy to sit down, discuss applications, and assist you in any way that we can. So if there aren't any other questions.
Yep, seeing none in the chat.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing some applications here in the coming weeks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.